Good day, dear viewer. My name is Michael A. Delitala, also known as the Revisionist. In my hands, I have the Revisionist Volume 3, Tales of Turmoil, which is poetry and short stories. You can find all of my volumes on Amazon. Please feel free to subscribe. Today, I'd like to present to you The Big Black Door. Now, if you look at the cover, that story makes up the premise for the book cover, which I designed. Didn't know I could do that. Anyway, you might like to know I wrote this in 1985, which means I was 8 years old at the time. And I wrote this for fifth hour literature, of which I received an A++. And the teacher told me it reminded her of Stephen King, who I aspire to be like. He's one of my all-time favorites. Anyway, The Big Black Door, circa 1985. I had recently been living with an old man who had a monstrosity of a house. The old man, whose name I shall never mention again, let me stay with him even though I was an out-of-state traveler. He told me to make myself at home, but warned me to never go across the hall to the big black door. As I was not very well off and he was letting me stay for free, and that was his only rule, I was happy to oblige. However, the best of my curiosity finally won, and I just had to see what was behind the big black door. What was behind it? I don't know because I cannot remember. The only thing I know now is my cold gray cell with its cement floor and steel bars that I sit in and stare out, hoping for someone to find me. As far as I can tell, I have been in this cell for 2 days now. It's so hard to keep track of time when there's no light and no sound except for your own breath. In any case, the darkness and my own thoughts have slowly allowed me to piece together what has happened. As I have said before, the old man had warned me never to go across the hall to the big black door. He was a scientist of some sort. As a matter of fact, he was a very well-known scientist. He had won several big prize awards for his work, which is probably how he was able to fund this huge mansion he lived in and that I was now a prisoner in. Every day was the same routine for the old man. He would get up in the morning and brush and floss his yellowed dentures. Then he would disappear behind the big black door. Then there would be screams and shouts of anger, but also of love. All day long, I would hear these screams and shouts and things breaking and crashing up until the stroke of midnight. And then at midnight, at the very sound of the clock ringing, there would be absolute silence. That's it. Complete silence. Just like the silence I have to experience now in my cell. You can see why I just had to see what was behind the big black door. For months and days and hours, I lived with the screams and the shouts, and it literally drove me insane. I'm sure you're thinking, well, why didn't you just leave? It's not so simple, my friends. Would you be able to leave and never know what was behind the big black door? I think not. I had to know. Anyway, after the moment of silence, I would hear the old man walk through the big black door, and I would hear him talking to himself, but I could never quite make out what he was saying. Something about being damned, I'm sure. I hated him for it. Then he would go to bed and sleep until he got up in the morning to brush and floss his yellow dentures, and it would all be repeated the next day. I never saw or heard him eat or even do something as simple as use the bathroom. Were all of his necessities behind the big black door? I needed answers, damn it! This routine of the old man was driving me mad. Mad, I say! I had to see what was going on behind the big black door. I just had to. The next day, as usual, I awoke to the shouts and screams, and I just couldn't live one more day like this. I jumped out of my bed, threw open my door, and just stood in the doorway thinking, no, planning what I was going to do. Forget the plans. An insane man acts purely on instinct and without thought. I started to casually walk up to the big black door. Then I started to jog. Then I broke out into a sprint. And finally, after what seemed like miles and miles, I finally reached the big black door. I was across the hall, and now here I was in front of the item that had been on my mind for so long. It seemed so simple now. All I had to do was open it. Easier said than done, my friends. The door wasn't as big as I had first thought it to be. It was as big as any normal door I had stood in front of, yet I had thought it to be big. I took a couple of steps back until I was 10 feet away from the door, and its shape and size never changed. As I continued to walk backward, the door continued to get bigger. I thought this to be very strange, but quickly brushed the thought out of my mind. I had to focus on why I was standing here in the first fucking place. The shouts and the screams, damn it. I must peer in. So again, I was in front of the door. I reached out and grabbed the knob. It was stinging cold. And as soon as I laid my hands on it, chills ran up and down my spine. I turned it slowly so as hopefully not to disturb the old man. Hopefully he wouldn't catch me. Don't ask me any further why. Maybe I felt as though he had some kind of telepathic connection with the big black door. Anyway, I turned it slowly, possibly not to disturb whatever was behind the big black door. The door is open now, and all I could do was just stare at all the fucking horror that was staring back at me. It took my breath away, but not before I had a chance to vomit my breakfast onto the hardwood floor. What I saw were tubes and wires and eccentric machines that I was sure no eyes had ever witnessed before, besides the old man, of course. But what was hooked up to the machines was the most disturbing part of it all: bodies, human bodies. I could not tell you if they were living or if they were dead. What I can tell you is that they started screaming at me with mouths that were closed. One of the bodies noticed that the door was open, and then they all noticed that the door was open and they quieted at once. This was more eerie to me than when they were screaming, but it did give me a chance to look around. There were at least 7 bodies in all, and one thing is for sure, all their mouths were sealed shut, yet they were still able to scream. Only the upper half of their torso was visible. Where the other half was, I could not tell you. Eyes were missing or dangling, ears were not visible. One of the bodies had all its internal organs in what used to be its lap. Again, I vomited. One body had its brain in a jar sitting right next to it. Male? Female? But somehow still connected to it. Then the old man, possibly troubled by the sudden silence, came racing through the door. He slipped and fell in my vomit in what what was to me was comical. Now he paid no attention to me, but started to pour a crimson fluid into one of his eccentric machines. At once the bodies began to scream and shout louder than they ever had before. I started yelling myself. I was not yelling at the half bodies, but at the old man to please stop whatever he was doing. Then he took notice of me again and immediately rushed me. He was fast, so fast that I didn't even have a chance to react. I did get to see his face, though. It was as strange as the bodies. It was turning different colors of rage and seemed to transform into some monster from some movie, a Stephen King fucking movie. And before I fucking knew it, I was on the ground and the old man was on me, beating the shit out of me. With each smack of his fist, I could feel bones in my face crackling and breaking. All the while, the bodies were still screaming, but not ever saying anything. The old man was still pounding on me with a strength I had never encountered before, and then I was out. Which brings me to where we started. I sit here in my cold, gray cell, pondering what is to become of my future. Perhaps all those tortured souls, those half bodies, were other guests of the old man's. Perhaps they too just had to see what was behind the big black door. Perhaps I will become one of those screaming bodies with organs laid out in front of me. Maybe I will scream and shout about nothing until the stroke of midnight. It could be that the old man shuts off his machines at the stroke of midnight, and then they shut off too. A mindless, tortured soul that is only allowed to mourn all hours of the day and to be shut off into oblivion at night. If I had only listened to the old man's warning and left the door alone, or just simply left, but we have already discussed this. I awake the next day to find that I am no longer in my cell, but I am laid carefully in the hall that contains the big black door. It is open, and there are no longer any shouts or screams. What does it all mean? Maybe I'll find out if I peer into the room, or maybe I won't. Thank you, dear viewer. Please subscribe if you like it. Check me out on Amazon. I have a ton more content on the